like in most developing countries, feels that they are very special and that they don't need to be so transparent. But UPR, or the introduction of the UPR process, actually broke the ice to some extent, because it is a huge new process, and even governments felt it was difficult to take on it and go through it, and they also needed to some extent to sort of interact with civil society, and also they also wanted to know what civil society is planning to do in terms of submissions, etc. So that kind of the novelty associated with the process sort of also brought in an opportunity for civil society to be able to start a dialogue or a process of a dialogue with their foreign ministers. So we see the UPR as an important window for this kind of engagement, which involves foreign policy and human rights. And the foreign policy, in the case of the UPR, it's that country's own UPR, is also linked to domestic issues. Now, besides the process in which we work, now of course I'll go quickly into, at this stage I also want to mention a little bit about coalition building. One of the things that we try to do where we can, where it's possible, is to try to build national coalitions to work on the UPR process, but also to implement it, or not to implement it, to monitor the implementation of it after the UPR is over. But it's not always possible in all countries, and it's also not always possible to have a coalition all the time, because civil society dynamics are different inside different countries. So where it's possible we try, and sometimes we try to do it thematically on thematic issues, where there are a number of civil society groups working on one particular theme, and then there are significant recommendations on it that need following up. In that sense, that's an area where we try our best to build coalitions, but this also goes into the sub-regional and regional levels. So we have a number of meetings and processes where we try to look at the UPR through a regional lens. Most of the time it's easier for us to actually look at it sub-regionally in Asia, because like I said before, Asia is not really a homogeneous region, and it has a lot of diversity inside it. So we prefer to sometimes look at it as Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, and South Asia, where there's a bit more similarity. And the things that make this kind of sub-regional dynamics attractive in Asia is, for us, is similarity in issues often, because often countries who are joining each other have similar kind of issues or similar kind of recommendations that they have to deal with. And sometimes they also have similar legal and institutional structures, which means that implementing recommendations with a particular kind of recommendations might be common to each other. And the third thing, which also we feel sometimes important in terms of organizing regional meetings of the UPR, is a mutual reinforcement, because over a long period of 4.5 years, it's very easy for people to lose interest in terms of implementation of the UPR. And sometimes it's good for people to meet people from other regions or regions nearby which are similar to, which have similar situations to their own, and listen to stories, and which keeps them motivated to keep going on the implementation, on the monitoring of the implementation. Now, lastly, coming towards the end of my presentation, I just want to briefly talk about some of the activities that we are currently doing in the region. So far, I'm just going to look at this year, and this year we actually changed our approach. We've been talking internally a lot about changing our approach, or what new approach we should take towards UPR. Previously, what we did was, especially during the first cycle, we did a number of regional training and sub-regional trainings for NGOs to participate in the UPR process, but that is long over now. A lot of the civil society groups know what to do and how to participate in the UPR. So our next main focus is actually on implementation, which is which we see as the most important thing that needs to be done in the region. But in terms of implementation, once again, we don't want to take a one-off approach of having meetings or trainings before or after the UPR submissions or the the actual review. But we want to do it more in a long-term process where we work with our members over a period of 4 years in selected countries. It is very difficult, but because we see the implementation process as a long, ongoing process. In that sense, we did 3 meetings this year, and the first one was regarding Laos. We couldn't do it in Laos because it's difficult to do it in Laos of this nature. And this was also primarily because there was a lot of demand from Laotian groups, but at the same time it was very difficult for them to engage with the process because of the situation in the country. So we had to do a meeting outside Laos in Thailand, and where Laotian groups were able to come, but of course they couldn't. In the meeting we worked on drafting the UPR submission, but of course that couldn't be made under the names of those groups because it's too dangerous. So we worked with a number of other regional organizations in doing this meeting and making this submission. And we will continue to try and see, to find ways of how we can support Laotian human rights defenders to engage with the UPR, because this is a unique situation. It's different because it is very difficult for people to work from being in that country and say that they're working on it openly. The other country we worked on was Maldives. In Maldives there were already some coalitions working on the UPR. Our idea was to bring in parliamentarians into the process because they were working on their submission before the deadline for submission. The review is coming up next year. And what we did was try to broaden the scope of discussions beforehand and try to bring people from the National Human Rights Institution into civil society discussions. We tried to bring parliamentarians into the discussion, and of course, like I explained before in terms of our approach, trying to deepen the engagement beforehand, and then we will go back again and try and see if we can, after the review is over, to try and see if we can find a way of, again, bringing them together to discuss how to follow the implementation, follow up on the implementation. The third country we did a training it was Mongolia. Mongolia again had a large coalition, but at the same time the coalition were made up of groups that already knew very well about engaging with the UPR, but at the same time there was a number of community-based groups which were affiliated to our member organizations that needed to be quickly trained to catch up into the process of the national coalition. So we helped in that process, and then also in terms of facilitating the discussion of the report to be submitted. But we also tried again to see if we could get government officials, parliamentarians and others into the process. And we will again follow up on this after the review. We will again try to organize another meeting that looks at planning the follow-up of implementing the recommendation that come out of it. Now, the last thing that we try to focus on here in Geneva is also in terms of trying to get member organizations increasingly to make voluntary updates on item 6 to talk about how their governments have implemented UPR so far. And this does in some cases make governments come out and make their own statement about how far they've been implementing things, which is often lacking because governments prefer not to look at the UPR halfway through the 4.5-year period. So I'll stop there and pass it on to.
Merci beaucoup, Iniyan. N'oublions pas l'applaudir.